Cesar Chavez is equaled as a civil rights leader only by Martin Luther King Jr.
The year was 1965. Women were demanding equal pay for jobs and equal opportunities in education. Students were protesting the Vietnam War on college campuses across the nation. Black Americans were marching for equal rights. And in California, one man led a strike of California migrant farm workers, a strike demanding higher wages and better working conditions for his people. This man was Cesar Chavez, and his strike signaled the beginning of the Hispanic civil rights movement, the call for equality and social justice for all Hispanic Americans. As a result of the Mexican-American War of 1848, Mexico ceded its northern provinces to the United States. Many Mexicans chose to stay with their farms, homes, and businesses, but increasingly faced discrimination, segregation, an unsympathetic legal system, and racism by the Anglos who poured into the former Mexican territories. By the turn of the century, many Hispanic Americans faced the same struggles as Black Americans in finding fair housing, equal employment opportunities, a good education, and political rights. Indeed, during the 1930s Mexican repatriation campaign, many Hispanic American citizens were forced from the only home they had ever known and deported to Mexico. Then, during World War II, nearly 400,000 Hispanic Americans served their country honorably. Hispanic soldiers had fought for democracy abroad and now demanded it here at home. During the surge of post-war prosperity, more Hispanic Americans left their small towns and barrios, taking advantage of the opportunities offered in the GI Bill for education and housing, to partake in the American dream and become part of the rising middle class. As a result, a new sense of pride emerged in Hispanic heritage, and an Hispanic civil rights movement began to take shape. It encompassed a broad range of issues, from the restoration of land grants, to farm workers' rights, to equality in education, and to voter rights. At the same time, there was a growing culture of migrant farm workers, laborers who moved from place to place, harvesting and tending crops for large farm owners throughout the U.S. From the lush fields of California in the Southwest, to the fruit orchards of Washington and Oregon, to the vegetables for canned goods grown on the Midwestern farms in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Since World War I, these migrant workers, often Hispanic Americans and Mexican immigrants, had accepted the low-wage jobs and harsh working conditions that other Americans refused to take. Cesar Estrada Chavez, born on March 31, 1927, near Yuma, Arizona, was initiated into this migrant farm worker culture when his family lost their farm during the Depression. In the 8th grade, Chavez became a farm worker. And in 1948, Chavez started his life's work as a farm labor organizer, fighting against the large farm owners and huge conglomerates for better working conditions, higher wages, and equal rights. In 1962, he organized the National Farm Workers Association, which became the United Farm Workers of America in 1965. That year, Chavez made Hispanic civil rights a national issue when he started the Grape Pickers Strike and called for a nationwide boycott of table grapes. By involving television and radio, Chavez brought to the attention of all Americans the inhuman working conditions, low wages, and mistreatment endured by migrant farm workers. The strike and boycott lasted 5 years. Like Martin Luther King Jr., Cesar Chavez read Gandhi and never wavered from the principles of nonviolence, even though farm workers and their supporters were jailed and beaten and killed. Through it all, Chavez kept the movement together. In 1968, to underscore the horrible conditions facing migrants, he fasted for 25 days, drinking only water. His sacrifice brought the national media attention back to the movement and gave hope and purpose to the activists. Finally, in 1970, the United Farm Workers won concessions for their members, better working conditions and higher wages. At last, Hispanic Americans won a victory for civil rights. Following the Grape Pickers strike, other Hispanic leaders emerged, and the Hispanic civil rights movement began in earnest. Also known as the Chicano civil rights movement, it focused on improving conditions for Hispanic Americans. In 1966, Reyes Lopez Tijerina started a land grant movement in New Mexico to convince the federal government to honor the land grant provisions of the 1848 Mexican-American War Treaty. Dolores C. Huerta, co-founder and secretary-treasurer of the United Farm Workers, rose to become vice president of the AFL-CIO. In the same period, Rudolfo Corky Gonzalez started the Crusade for Justice in Denver, Colorado, a more radical Chicano rights movement demanding civil rights and equality for Hispanic Americans. Hispanics were on the road to full equality with all Americans. Yet, in the 21st century, the cause of Hispanic American rights broadened into a national debate on America's border policy and illegal immigration from Mexico and Latin America. Indeed, in post-9/11 America, the issue was whether the United States must have a secure border or welcome the Hispanic workers that American businesses needed to fill the low-paying jobs other Americans did not want. Cesar Chavez was a national leader, a rallying point for Hispanic rights, a man who Hispanic Americans to this day revere above all others for improving not only workers' rights, but all Hispanic Americans' lives. Chavez continued to work for migrant farm workers until his death on April 23, 1993. In 2000, the California legislature set aside March 31st to honor his life and work, the first holiday in U.S. history to honor a Hispanic American and a labor leader.